Hello, everybody. It's very nice to see you all here. Some familiar faces and some faces I look forward to meeting and saying hello to afterwards. So I would like to open this just by saying a few words about the topic, collaboration, because that's the business of ILC. We have a PowerPoint that we can start. I'm going to talk on the first slide of the PowerPoint, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague who's gonna take it from there. So if we get the PowerPoint up while I'm talking, that'll be great. So ILC is a partnership builder. We are a coalition of 330 organizations, and what characterizes ILC is that we bring together very diverse organizations. So we have among our membership 120 organizations that we call people's organizations. Those are organizations that belong particularly to 5 constituencies. Those constituencies are smallholder farmers, indigenous peoples, pastoralists, women, and youth. And collectively, those organizations represent 84 million people in about 90 countries. Around those organizations who are at the center of our coalition are multilateral organizations like the FAO, the World Bank, IFAD, UNCD, UNEP, UN Habitat. NGOs, very grassroots and large. And then for the purposes of this one, there is a recognized caucus of ILC, which is research organizations. Our members work for people-centered land governance. All of you, and I guess all of you in some way or another work on land and natural resources, know it's a very challenging sector to work in. There are no blueprint solutions. In fact, blueprint solutions, we know, unfortunately, can often take you to a worse place than before you started. And so we're looking always for building context-specific solutions that are often moving against the interests of those who have political and economic power in the countries or the localities in which we work. Shifting power is very much about what we're trying to do to make that change resilient and sustainable. And so in that context, a diverse partnership has the possibility to bring about change. And one comment that ever since I joined ILC, I have heard very regularly across our membership is a comment on the value of research organizations. Research organizations bring the evidence that the rest of our members use to push for change. Research organizations help to create space for collaboration because they put facts on the table in a situation where often it's very emotive. It's very it can be spark strong emotive reactions, land rights. Often governments and civil society might find themselves at odds. And starting with the facts often helps for a more dialogue-based interaction in which common ground can be found. And this is our experience in again and again. ILC supports national land coalitions in 30 countries. But what's also part of our recipe for change is that we work from the local to the global. So here at COP20, sorry, not COP, we're in the wrong COP, COP16, we have about 10 organizations of pastoralists. I'm glad that Mboskuda is here, and we have others as well. We have youth organizations too, and getting those voices into these debates is very important. But this is all derived from the work we do together on the ground. So that's just a bit to set the scene. We can go to the slide, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Alain, who will give you a few more details. But just to thank you, just to sort of give you the headlines about ILC. The people-centered land governance is what brings this diversity together as a coalition. We know that land governance can serve many different ends, but we stand very firmly as ILC that we start with the women, the men, the communities who live on and use the land, whose tenure we are discussing. And shifting power is something that over time has become more and more explicitly and deliberately part of our theory of change. realizing that if we don't address power relations head on, then maybe we're not actually bringing about any meaningful change at all. So how we do that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alain SME Bilowa, who is going to take you through the next slide. So I'll give you the microphone and the slide changer.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Who should I refer to? Chris? It's David. Sorry for the confusion. So I have like how many minutes left? 5 minutes. So it will be very quick because I know many of you are familiar with the ILC. We since the new strategy of ILC started a few years ago, we are trying to address 4 global challenges that you probably we are working to tackle climate change issues, shrinking democratic spaces, the inequalities, and unsustainable food systems. And how do we get there? ILC is working around 3 strategic objectives. We have multi-stakeholder platforms, national land coalitions that are covering strategy objective 1. These coalitions are there to promote people-centered land governance at the national and local level. Some of your organizations are part of these coalitions in the respective countries. We have Tanzania. I remember some members from Tanzania, from Cameroon National Land Coalition, who is here. We also work to generate people-centered citizens data for accountability. And I think you are all familiar with the Global Land Governance Index that ILC and other partners are rolling out. We also have regional and global advocacy platforms. We have the rangeland platforms here. We also have pastoralists. We have constituencies platforms that work at the sub-regional, regional, and the global level to promote, to use those political spaces that we have, like the COP, to bring this topic forward. I'm gonna skip the details of all these diverse objectives and take you straight to our research agenda. So our ILC, and again, as Mike said, ILC, its members, CIFOR, CRAF, IFPRI, some of them are even the founding members of the International Land Coalition. And at the last membership intake, all the CGIAR became member of the ILC. It means all of you, irrespective of your organization, you are now a member of ILC. So our research agenda aims at documenting the land, climate, and nature nexus and making the case of securing indigenous peoples and local communities land rights. So presently we have 2 ongoing knowledge and research projects. We have the land conflict driven by nature and climate solutions. And for this research project, we are collecting member-led case studies from 12 countries that explore the evolving connection between land rights, climate, and nature-based solutions. And some of these cases also document approaches to conflict resolution using nature-based solutions. I will give you the list of the 12 countries because there is overlap with other ongoing research. So the second research project is the people-centered climate and nature solutions, pulling evidences from knowledge and data for territorial case studies. And this specific knowledge initiative aims to highlight how indigenous peoples and local communities, through traditional knowledge and customary land management, contribute to conserving territories and biodiversity. So for the first project research, we are covering Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Morocco, Uganda, Kenya, Madagascar, Cambodia, Nepal, Palestine, and Spain. And for the second research project, we are covering Ecuador, Peru, Suriname, DRC, Tanzania, the Philippines, Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan, Palestine again, Albania, and Montenegro. For the next slide, there are, I'm trying to cover here the common agendas that we have with CGIARs, and we work mainly on 4 areas. My other colleagues, I think Tina will have the opportunity to cover some of these topics, but also when we will hear from maybe Reconcile and C4A, it will be also common work that we are doing as ILC with these CGIAR centers. The one I will focus on is on the multi-stakeholder platforms, because since last year, and even a couple of times before, we have been partnering with C4A as our lead technical partner to undertake global research that will help us to understand the different forms and modalities of partnerships between government and CSOs, and by extension, non-state actors in the land governance sector. And this research was produced the middle of the year, and we launched it last October at the sidelines of the CFS 52 in Rome. And we have covered 6 countries representing different geographies. We have Albania, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Colombia, the Philippines, and Kyrgyzstan, where C4A has helped us analyzing different forms of partnerships, and to also help us going in depth of this topic, they have also come up with a toolkit. So this toolkit brings to pools different tools. It's a toolkit, so there are different tools, and there are 6 of them that can be used by any stakeholder involved in the land governance who wants to work in partnerships. Our target here is the government, because for us, as ILC, we understand the value of always working with the government, who is the duty holder, and without whom any sustainable land governance, land policy cannot take place. So this part of the work is ongoing presently with C4A, and we hope that we will have other opportunities to expose our network and other stakeholders to these tools, very important. And we were a bit stuck with different events, and the toolkit will be released in the coming weeks, and we'll be happy to share it widely with your different networks. Thank you very much, and I hope I stick to the time.
Thank you, Alain, for is this working? Okay. Thank you, Alain, for outlining some of these common agendas, and thank you, Michael, for reminding us of the importance of research institutions. I did want to give an opportunity to Tina to share anything. Okay. All right. We'll pause that. So we're going to hear next from Anne Larson about some of the research on women's land rights and the collaboration between ILC and C4.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. That works. So how much time do I have total? How many?
10.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a project that we've been doing over the last few years with IFAD has been funding us on securing women's resource rights through gender transformative approaches. Now, let's see. I just hit the green. Okay. So the project itself had the objective of enhancing the recognition and protection of women's resource rights in targeted countries. I'll show you the countries in a moment. To contribute to the creation of conditions that would enable women's enjoyment of resource rights over time. And specifically, we were working very closely with IFAD. The idea was to work with their projects, with their country teams, to design and deploy innovative and participatory GTAs, to generate evidence-based recommendations and share best practices for integrating GTAs for land and resource rights into IFAD's global portfolio, and to engage key stakeholders at local and national levels to build capacities and inform relevant policy processes and implementation. So again, the donor was IFAD, consortium members were C4, ICRAF, the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and IFPRI. The project is just ending now. We're finishing up the final publications, and the partners were in country, the IFAD offices, IFAD projects, ILC members, and 1 or 2 action research partners who were working with us through the the years. And globally, we were also working with ILC and with the Stand for Her Land folks. So these are the countries. The main project was done in depth in Colombia, the Gambia, Uganda, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and Kyrgyzstan. And we did just some preliminary work in Niger, but the funding was not available to continue working in Niger. The other countries that are listed there were intended to be sort of the learning countries, but in fact, many things changed from the beginning of when we wrote the proposal and when we actually, COVID hit. And so the real learning environment was pretty much all of IFAD and any office that expressed interest. So first, I want to just talk about a little bit what are gender transformative approaches. For some of you, this may be old hat, but for those for whom it's new, for me, I like this particular scale of reach, benefit, and power, and the addition of transform, because I think it lays out really nicely the different ways that we've worked in the development community to address women's rights. So the reach is to include women. Reaching women means ensuring they have the same opportunity to access program activities as men. The benefit, improving women's well-being in some way. It requires more than reaching. It means the intervention needs to be done in a way that ensures women value it and it's beneficial to them. And it requires their needs and preferences to be considered in the design. Often this is training, capacity building, and then you count the number of people who were trained, right? For empower, it's a step further, strengthening the ability of women to make strategic life choices and act on them. It's beyond both reach and benefit. It involves increasing women's agency. And some projects focus directly on shifting gender norms and attitudes. And I would say sometimes we say empower is really at the individual level and what transform is more group level. But in this world, I think a lot of people have been working for a long time about trying to change the underlying structures and promoting collective action as well. But what's new about the transform, as I see it, is it's becoming more mainstream. And it's got a better definition and understanding of what we're really looking to do. So for transform, it's about changing the gender norms and attitudes on a larger scale. It's about changing the systems themselves, not just empowering women. It means going beyond the empowering individual women or the household level. It needs to involve men. It focuses on changing those gender norms at the community and society levels, addressing structural and institutional barriers, and mobilizing the power of the collective. So I'm having allergy attacks since I got here, so. This is another way I like to look at this from one of our team members, Miranda Morgan. It's sort of the transform is now getting down to what's invisible and underlying everything else. So the visible part is what women choose to act on, but then there's also what society says about how women and men should behave, and how society values people of different genders and different identities. So again, the idea, we want sustained systemic change. And third, the last one on what are GTAs. This is a lot of things put together here. There are many, I would say, somewhat contested definitions of what exactly GTAs mean. But there's pretty much a consensus that it differs from other gender integration approaches in design, implementation, and intended outcomes. So as I've already said, addressing the root causes of gender inequalities is key. Policies, norms, underlying power relations. The approach should emerge from and should be led by local collective action and leadership, or the collective action of the group, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be local. It's based on building trust, fostering critical reflection. It needs to engage men and boys, and it needs to engage influential norm holders, often religious leaders, for example. The approaches need to be context-specific, flexible, and adaptive. We use participatory and experiential learning methods and recognizing complexity, including intersecting forms of discrimination or intersectionality. Explicitly, it's aimed to support the safety of people who are being disruptive. We can't put people in risky positions and walk away. And then bringing attention to our own politics and practices of power. Those of us who are outsiders to a particular group, what are we bringing in, and discussing that openly in terms of figuring out what the steps forward are. So in this project, we did a ton of work that I'm going to show you just some publications at the end, but what we're really here to talk about was the collaboration with ILC. And so the first interaction we had with ILC was at the Land Forum in Jordan, 2022, where we pitched the WRR project at the Women's Caucus. We co-designed a learning lab on transforming gender relations for more equitable land rights to encourage social norm change at the forum. And from that, we had a request from the ILC and Stand for Her Land to help to come to a workshop they were organizing with women leaders in Tanzania to talk about gender transformative approaches, to train the women. And so it presented an opportunity for us to figure out what we were doing and really figure out a model. What would it look like? How do we really do this? Gender transformative on women's land and resource rights. So that, and then ILC published the group forum, developed their collective vision of the future. We did visioning, and I'll show you what we tested in a few minutes. And ILC published that vision. And then we used that and built on that to do an in-depth training towards the end of the project, a 3-day training on gender transformative approaches. ILC also had a section during that, and they participated during the 3-day training as well. Within country, Kyrgyzstan, there were some partnerships. We were able to work with the ILC members, bring them together with government, the IFAD-funded staff, and others with some prospects for future collaboration. And from the beginning and ongoing, we were in dialogue, and we're still talking about dialogue on global scaling and further collaboration with Stand for Her Land. So where we had the most engagement was where there was also a very active ILC and Stand for Her Land folks. The Africa Regional Coordinator was in Uganda. So from the beginning, the ILC was very deeply engaged in the whole project in Uganda. The inception workshop, the Africa Regional Coordinator was invited. They invited the National Land Coalition Coordinator. We then used them as reviewers for the legal analysis that we first started our work with. When we moved into the co-creation and piloting stages, the National Land Coalition nominated and worked with LandNet Uganda to develop a legal empowerment clinic, which was one of the main tools we developed, and did a training of trainers on that. There was a national learning exchange where LandNet organized this and then brought in the ministries from land and gender, but also the ILC, all the National Land Coalition thematic leads. There was a World Cafe. We aren't the only ones who presented. Everyone presented their work, and to just develop a dialogue within the country, or build on the dialogue that ILC had already been doing. Really nice outcome of this was that the ministry, I forget which ministry it is, lands, housing, and urban development, said they would adopt the guide, the legal empowerment guide, for their own government trainings on legal issues. And then we have a number of global exchanges that we've done together with ILC and with Stand for Her Land. So just to sum up in 1 minute, in case you're interested in what we've done, we have 30 country publications. We have 14 tools, an overview guide to the tools, 7 global publications, most of which are in French, Spanish, and English. This is the first thing we did actually after that Tanzania workshop, thinking about how we were going to adapt this GTA approach to women's land and resource rights. This is what we used. We used the Gender at Work framework, where you have the individual change to systemic change, informal to formal, and in those 4 quadrants, you figure out what actually matters for women's land and resource rights. So this is what we've produced. If you want to know more about it, come to our event Saturday at 6 p.m. in meeting room 2, I believe. And just to flash through a couple others, this is the most recent one we did, where we took the Reach, Benefit, Empower, Transform framework and actually went through all those 4 quadrants, put in goals, activities, and indicators of what it would look like if we were doing Reach. What if your goal is benefit? What if your goal is empower? What if your goal is transform? So it's been really fun to do, really, really exciting to try and figure this stuff out. This is all of the tools put together in how they fit into the quadrant, which kind of area they are most helpful for. And this is the how-to do note, which is an IFAD publication that should be in press shortly and is currently being translated to Spanish and French. And that's that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. That's really extraordinary to see. I think you can just put that. Yeah. Extraordinary to see all of the outputs and tools that came from that and how collaboration begat more collaboration. Next, we're going to hear from Fiona about the International Livestock Research Institute's research on land use planning in Tanzania.
And yeah, whilst I'm up here, so just to explain the objective of this meeting, it was really, I've been having the CGIAR seat on the ILC Council. So the CGIAR has a seat on the ILC Council, and I've been having that for the last 3 years. My tenure is just coming to an end, and I'm now handing over to ICADA. So we want to rotate now through the CGIAR centers, and the Alliance will kind of second me. And one thing I was trying to do was try and improve the partnership between CGIAR centers and other ILC members under the framework of the ILC Secretariat. And so this was another kind of opportunity to do that for ILC to learn more about some of the research we're doing, for the CGIAR centers to learn more about ILC. And so we got 3 presentations where we do have that collaboration, and then we got 3 that is CGIAR research. So I hope going forward in our science programs in the CGIAR, we'll be doing more collaborations. So that was the objective. Okay. So this is work that I have been doing with that as a member with the ILC, other ILC members over the last few years. Decade, in fact, and it started from the Sustainable Rangeland Management Project in Tanzania. So this was originally an IFAD-funded project through ILC. No, it was Austrian and European Union. I can't remember who funded it, but it came through IFAD to ILC, and I was brought in. This is when I was a consultant, brought in as a technical advisor. And one of the things we found was that the project had been supporting village land use planning. And like here, we've got 4 villages, but these 4 villages share this light green is grazing land that they share. So when you start putting boundaries, stronger boundaries around the village, you're in danger of breaking up the shared grazing land. So we developed this joint village land use planning approach. And it was something that we've been working on basically for 10 years. Now through the CGIAR initiative on livestock and climate, we've continued to support it, working with ILC members so that, that connection has stayed there. And it's really made a difference in how we can have impact on the ground. Because as a CGIAR, we can develop innovations, come up with new ideas, but we need to be working with actors on the ground and also having the benefit of ILC's entry points into the government as well. After the communities do their land use planning, there's the opportunity for them to secure rights as a group. So the livestock keepers get a group certificate for those lands. And it's a really, for me, it's the best example that I've seen. Tanzania is lucky in that they have facilitating policy and legislation. The problem is putting it into implementation. It costs a lot. But actually, as a scientist, for me, this is the most meaningful work that I do, is actually seeing our work like impacting on pastoralists and others to secure their land rights. And actually, it was really through the partnership of ILC that has allowed me to do that. And now it's even got to a point where through that collaboration, through influencing the governments, we now have this approach taken up by the National Land Use Planning Commission. So it's been incorporated into the National Participatory Land Use Planning Guidelines, and then it's also got its own guidelines. So that's been this year. So we've been able to take it up to the policy, and it's not only now for grazing lands, this is also been taken up for forests and other common property resources. So, over that decade, we've really, together with the ILC members, been able to have this impact. We've also at the same time been building capacity, so working very strongly with the National Land Use Planning Commission, the government, also ILC members. And then the other opportunity that ILC gave us was to use the kind of learning, the connections that the ILC network has, and the establishment of a rangelands initiative, which originally started off as doing learning route journeys. So the idea, we were working with another ILC member, Procasor, and they had this methodology called learning routes. And it's basically a journey from A to B, and you visit 3 or 4 good practice examples along that journey, depending on the theme that you were looking at. So we were looking at how to secure land tenure and rights. And so originally we did 2 learning routes where it was an open call. We invited through ILC members or others, did this journey. The protagonists, the ones sharing their story are very well prepared. Procasor goes through this process with them. And so we had 2 trips through Kenya and Tanzania, learning about good examples about securing tenure and rights. Then UNEP supported one specifically for Sudan, for governments from Sudan. And then we supported one for the Ethiopian government. So that opportunity, and they visited the land use planning sites, they visited the other places where ILC members. So this kind of learning opportunity as well kind of broadened out our kind of reach as a science organization. And then finally, policy influencing. So again, building on our good practice, working through the members and working through the national land coalitions, being able to influence government. I mean, one thing we've been doing like over the 10 years is kind of learning from the experiences of Tanzania and taking it to the governments of Ethiopia and Kenya. And there's been several events, I mean, starting from, I think, the Global Land Forum in Dakar, where we brought one person from the land directorate in Ethiopia, one from Tanzania, one from Kenya, kind of got them together, talking about their different experiences. And then over the 10 years, continuing for them to get engaged. And this was one in up to 2022, where some of the people are still the same. And we've got one person here from Uganda, one from Ethiopia, one from Kenya, and they're still exchanging those experiences on land use planning. And we've also got someone from IGAD there. So again, this opportunity for us as scientists really to use this fantastic network to reach policymakers and also build capacities at the same time. So that's all I'm going to share. And I will now pass to Ken, who will kind of build on that, I think, and tell us a bit more about the work that we've been doing together.
Thank you, Fiona. I think largely Fiona is already speaking about what I'm supposed to be talking about. I don't know, I can't see my presentation. Anyway, okay, so here's the green one. It's the green one, yeah. So, yeah, so for me, it's looking at the next level after SRMP, which was participatory sustainable rangelands management, and the thinking through of how the collaboration between ILC members, the CGIAR centers, government, as Fiona has demonstrated. And I'm thinking about how we conceptualized the whole idea from SRMP to PRM. And SRMP, of course, is Sustainable Rangelands Management, which has a history. And it is what anchored the first initiative, which was basically the learning initiative. And the learning initiative here is what birthed the Rangelands Initiative. Originally conceptualized around the members or the partners that you see there, IFAD, ILC, IUC, and VSF Belgium, ILRI Reconcile, Procaso. And this was about initiating a conversation and learning on the group ranches system. You saw two pictures, one with some people standing around some bananas, and in the other photo that Fiona presented, some people sitting in a circle. So one was in Kenya, the other one was in Tanzania. And then thinking more about making a case for greater rangelands restoration, and the question was how, where, and by who. So how here is basically what was the procedure? What was the methodology? And the methodology was that learning, visualizing, listening to people, understanding what their experiences are. Where is specific countries where this was happening? So walking from Kenya or traveling from Kenya across to Tanzania. And by who were members of ILC from across the globe. And I think the first one was the most painful one, because we traveled for around, was it 14? I think 14 days. And it was quite a long drive. And basically was to learn and understand what is going on. And then we put a pause and asked ourselves, what next? And I always reflect on this and say that it was an interesting exercise, because then we had an initial conversation with the European Union or the European Council, I mean the European Commission, through the Coalition of European Lobbies or Eastern African Pastoralists. And the whole idea was, how do we take this learning forward? So that was way back in 2016. And subsequently, a conversation between EU and ILC, took place. And PRM was established, conceptualized from the scaling up of SRMP, transforming after learning. We realized that there were certain investments, a lot of investments were there, but again, there were gaps in terms of how do you engage communities to own the process? And therefore, moving that forward, ILC then was the interlocutor between ILC members, IFAD, and the EU. And this is basically now how PRM then works. And PRM then works around ensuring that there are issues and systematic engagement with and by communities, and how they guard the management and use application of the land governance system. And majorly looking at how grazing is managed, looking at how water resources are used, land use planning, recognition of customary tenure, land tenure system, conflict, climate change, integration of traditional knowledge, livelihood diversification. But there are challenges even as this is happening. They are very nice, but still there are a lot of challenges that also need to be reflected around. One of them is land degradation. So even though you organize for this land use and grazing patterns and grazing management systems, there are still issues around how do you ensure that it is sustainable. And there's something I call the abundancy and the scarcity. This is often an argument around why conflicts occur when you have a huge swaths of land with a few people, but still there is conflict. So there is too much, but at the same time, there's little. So how do you reconcile the two? And then the issues of climate change, conflict over resources, state of infrastructure, market access, and insecure tenure security. So these are things that needs reflection, even as we pilot and we scale up successful initiatives such as PRM. And basically, these are the issues. So what does then PRM do? PRM basically allows a conversation around those challenges, whether it is migratory route, whether it is access to market, whether it's around land use planning, whether it's around governance, whether it's around community institutions, PRM facilitates a conversation that makes everybody make collaborative or a collective decision. But what makes PRM unique is that it is community owned, it's a community process, and it's a community implemented initiative. And it's a process of planning management and management of rangelands led by the people themselves or the communities themselves, and is supported often by government. And that is where institutions like ILRI and these other CGIAR centers, organizations like Reconcile, experts like the group of people we saw sitting down there, come in to give different ideas in strengthening how communities use. And PRM is underpinned by understanding, planning, and implementation. And it involves a number of stakeholders together to converse, to agree, and identify the common issues and the intervention mechanisms through inventories and understanding more about how resources are found, where they are found, and how they are used. What are the lessons that we've learned? We've learned lessons around the need to have healthy rangelands, which has indirect influence in communities' livelihoods, but also has particularly importance, especially when assessing the contribution of healthy rangelands to improve livelihoods. The second one is, even if with the knowledge, the participation of men, women, youth, the community collectively and collaboratively is important. And lastly, is that any management model that parcels rangelands is not sustainable because of exclusion. And I think we saw that even in terms of when we were looking at the GTA, which was presented earlier on. So moving forward, it is important to think about an integrated approach in terms of conflict management, documenting lessons, strengthening multiple stakeholder platforms and stakeholder partnerships, supporting initiatives for exchange, learning and sharing, strengthening and enabling policy environment, and influencing global initiatives such as opportunities we are having here today. And yes, sorry.
All right, thank you, Ken. Covering a lot of different research, but a lot of themes in common emerging, especially the need for multi-stakeholder partnerships. Next, we are going to hear from Janelle Sylvester. I've caught you by surprise. Janelle is going to talk about the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT's work on developing land for peace work in Colombia.
I have 10 minutes. Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Janelle Sylvester. I'm a research specialist at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, CIAT being the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, one of the CGIAR centers. And yeah, I'm based in Cali, Colombia, where my work focuses on integrating restoration, conservation, and sustainable land management in multifunctional landscapes. And so I'm going to talk a bit about a project that just came to a close. It was a 5-year-long project, and it touches on conflicts, but the conflicts are a bit different than what we tend to see in Africa. As Colombia experienced a 50-year-long armed conflict that came to an end in 2016 after the peace agreement. And what's unique about this project, which was funded by the International Climate Initiative, is that it aimed to contribute to while also contributing to forest conservation as a way to reduce emissions from deforestation. But at the same time, it contributed to landscape restoration and livelihood improvements. And The project, which basically we supported farmers in the implementation of agroforestry systems, cacao agroforestry and silvopastoral systems. And the project took both land-based and market-based approaches. And the success of the project really lies in the participatory approach that was used to co-design land use systems, which allowed adapting individual interventions to the needs of the farmers and to the communities. And so on the land-based side, through co-designed approaches, farmers were able to kind of identify the practices that most suited them and had the greatest benefits in terms of greenhouse gas mitigation, livelihood improvements, depending on their priorities. And then on the value chain side, through participatory value chain upgrading strategies, development of inclusive, sustainable business models, were able to provide value addition to the products that were coming from these systems, and were able to have greater access to markets. And especially due to the zero deforestation value chain approach, this allows tapping into international markets, especially now with the European Union's deforestation regulation, where they will no longer import products related to or connected to deforestation. And no. Okay. Yes. As we've mentioned, the importance of, sorry, sleep is bothering me. As we mentioned, the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships. A key part of this project was the multi-stakeholder platforms that were formed. And as the capacity building that was carried out to be able to kind of manage on the practices, depending whether silvopastoral or cacao agroforestry, the different kinds of practices to increase sustainability and the profitability of the systems. Capacity building is well related to the sustainable business models. And so, as we're talking about governance, as I mentioned, a key part is the multi-stakeholder platforms, and they help to facilitate dialogue and collective decision-making, and the co-design of these value chain upgrading strategies, and this allowed to foster cooperation in resource management. The participatory approaches also fostered social cohesion, as this project was carried out in 2 departments of Colombia, in Caquetá, which is in the Amazonian region, and Cesar in the northern region, both being highly impacted by the armed conflict. And these approaches help to improve collaboration among the stakeholders and build trust among them, and as well with the different associations involved in the value chain. The capacity building initiatives help strengthen actors' ability to manage and govern the land resources. And the peace building component is that through the zero deforestation value chains and sustainable business models, they had access to viable economic alternatives to illicit activities. As well, in terms of the environmental benefits, we saw increased carbon stocks, improved soil health, and reduced deforestation as a big part of these interventions as well are these conservation agreements. So smallholders who participated in this project had the opportunity to sign voluntary conservation agreements, basically saying in exchange for this capacity building and support for the implementation of these systems, you voluntarily agree to, conserve part of your land with no repercussions and no reinforcement. It's a very, but surprisingly, these conservation agreements are quite effective. I guess not surprising, but sometimes when you hear voluntary agreements, they can sometimes not be as effective as we want. But in Colombia, these conservation agreements are proving to be very promising. Yeah, and so there's other work that's underway coming from this project and some upcoming projects. And I was hoping to include some of the results from these preliminary findings, but there wasn't time. But there is a study underway about the interactions or the interlinkages between the conflict and the land tenure and land markets, with a hypothesis that areas that had higher conflicts experienced higher or more insecure land tenure, which then led to higher land transactions, which is kind of a proxy for deforestation. A lot of deforestation comes from either the land grabbing or illegal means of acquiring lands, or through buyers due to just very low land prices. So for next year, for the ILC meeting in Colombia, we hope to present results from that. For a future project that we're in the process of planning, we want to take this approach and bring it to more to the landscape scale, integrating more of the integrated land use planning. As well, we've also created a guide to research for creating enabling environments for scaling of our focus was on low emission innovations, but it could be adapted to scaling of, we could say agri-food system innovations. And this approach has 6 steps, looking at kind of the underlying causes, the root drivers of land use change, understanding the institutional arrangements, understanding the institutional and policy drivers of land use change, understanding the overlaps between government priorities and where sustainable interventions could be implemented, and understanding barriers to the adoption of innovations. And within this framework, a lot of work can be done in terms of land tenure, in terms of understanding governance systems within Colombia. So also, just to conclude, so Fiona and I worked on or published a position paper. Granted, it was for the CBD COP, but I felt like it was worth sharing here because we also highlight the importance of or the role of governance in conflicts, and the importance of addressing or how interventions within environmental peace building, how they contribute to addressing governance issues that restrict access to resources, and the vital role that environmental peace building can play in generating both environmental and peace outcomes within our interventions. And then yesterday I had a session about landscape restoration for peace, which is recorded, and so I'm happy to share the recording with anybody who's interested. I'll also be sharing it on networks. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you for telling us about some exciting and interesting research. Yeah. Yeah, it's great to hear that voluntary schemes can sometimes be effective. Next, we're going to hear from Claudia about, I'm surprising all the panelists. Yes, she's going to tell us about IFPRI's work on gender, land rights, and soil.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really mostly speaking on behalf of Ruth Meinzendick. I think you've seen her name coming up all the time. And yeah, IFPRI was a founding member, I think, of ILC, and obviously has closely worked with ILC members over all these years. I think a little bit of the background there is that Ruth started an early initiative across CGIAR. I think now we are all tired of initiatives, but that was when we were still excited about initiatives. That was in the mid-1990s and was called the Collective Action and Property Rights Initiative. And yeah, and it basically, oops, oh. Okay, yeah, and I think one of the key outputs of this particular initiative is the CAPRI toolbox. And I think at least for us, this remains the North Star. This is kind of what we follow when we try to think and talk about rights. And so you can pretty much put anything in the middle, depending what kind of resource you're interested in. It could be forests, it could be land. Yeah, I mean, this is actually a combination, I guess, of different resources that can be affected. And what's important here is that we can have a short to a long time frame, and the importance of rights as an incentive to invest increases with the time frame. So investing in an agroforestry project or activity on your land is less likely to occur if your land rights are highly insecure. You might, however, put an annual crop in and then you're out very quickly. At the same time, space, so we've heard about rangelands. I think IFPRI has engaged a lot on communal lands as well with ILC member Foundation for Ecological Security. So there we talk about much larger spaces. And then, we need more coordination and we move into the collective action space. I think that is kind of this box, where we move in different directions for different right systems. And I think maybe one more point, and to some extent, you can also see that here, the different rights to different resources come together. And I think the ILC Indigenous Peoples members very much focus on territorial rights. And I think, again, how do you bring these rights systems together? I think is an important area where more work has to be done. And I guess, thinking about the climate change agenda, carbon rights, I think is another area that's very important, because who is actually getting access to the benefit streams and who owns those rights to carbon, for example. And yet another area that's also somehow linked with climate change is the EV, the electric vehicles. So there's a lot of rights to minerals where I think we still have to do more work on. So for a future ILC agenda on rights to mineral resources. And those, again, are very closely linked with other rights. I mean, for example, Ghana, whenever we go in Ghana, sooner or later, the gold mining comes up, and to what extent, who has the rights to those, to the mines, to the gold, but then also the, the negative externalities from the mining on water resources, pollution, and yeah, etc. externalities. Yeah, and gendered rights, it's very important. I mean, you said from the beginning, this is all about people, exactly, and people are not, they're different people, and obviously so many different ILC member organizations, and IFPRI has always had a focus on gendered systems, and this is kind of, yeah, and as just trying to understand what are the benefit streams from women's land rights, and what do we know and what do we not know, right? So this is kind of a framework of what these women's land rights might affect. And it was surprising, that there's actually not as much evidence out there. So we do need more research, and obviously, hopefully in collaboration with ILC members to fill a lot of those gaps. For example, there was no real evidence that strengthened women's land rights actually improved their access to credit. So what are then other bottlenecks, that need to be overcome? Or maybe, just not enough people have published on that. There's not enough evidence out there. At the same time, what this has shown, and I think many CGIAR centers have done work on that, is if we do strengthen women's land rights, we see really increased investment in climate smart agricultural practices, leguminous crops, agroforestry systems, etc. Again, it plays right into the restoration agenda and also into the climate agenda, and to some extent also in the biodiversity agenda. So that linkage is very well documented, and we have at ILRI recommended to some of the agronomic focused centers and technology focused organizations to, rather than throwing more technologies and practices at farmers, to actually strengthen women's knowledge of their existing land rights. And if they have better knowledge of their land rights, for example, in Ethiopia, we can show those women are more likely to implement these climate smart practices. And if they don't have the knowledge of these rights, they will not do it. And we have already heard in rangelands, water rights are very important. So we have to talk about how water is linked to land rights. And we have once, it's actually one of the few things I'm linked with, developed a guide on how to empower communities over freshwater resources. And so here we're talking about a very large scale, right? I mean, it could be a smaller water body, but it could be also a pretty big river system. And so then what are some of the measures that are needed to support communities to exert some rights over those resources? And relatively new framework that's also linked to the Nexus Gains initiative that Mohsin, who's speaking, I think, after me and myself, are linked with, is called the Knowledge, Motivation, and Agency Framework. And we increasingly understand that you can apply this. Yeah. Is this one? Yep. We can, also just keep switching. We can apply this framework also to see how we can strengthen resource rights for communities. So the communities need the knowledge. The community need to be empowered through motivation and also obviously agency, and that's where sometimes financial resources, but other tools can actually help. So you can throw a lot of things into this framework. So just knowledge. I mean, we've heard the delineation of land parcels or the integrated land planning, some GIS support, understand the foundation of conflicts, raising awareness, of the benefit, and especially, again, the knowledge of land rights. So that can all support knowledge. Motivation is very important, intrinsic and motivation. Okay, I think, not sure. We might be done here. Stop too, that's maybe. Yeah, so these PES programs, right? Usually we say that there's maybe one way, but they might crowd out the intrinsic motivation because suddenly you're driven by extrinsic motivation and you might actually, again, come to some non-desired outcomes. Yeah. And then, tools to support agency, I think, is another way to strengthen land rights systems, community funds for rights monitoring and implementation of restorative action. This is the application of this framework for groundwater governance. And I'm not going over it, but Ruth just published a whole bunch of blogs and briefs. It's all online. The last point she wanted me to make is on measurement. Measurement matters. So she reflected on the fact that land rights were not, there was no way to link them to the SDGs because we didn't have data systems that would allow us to review progress over time. So that is obviously one of the issues if we want to achieve change over time. But there is now more, I think, we have many more measurement frameworks, and I think some were already mentioned earlier today. But there's a new measure called Women's that is trying to understand women's agency and to be used by national statistical systems, and that includes apparently a pretty good land rights module, and it's short. It's always the problem. These things are too long. So it is apparently a very short module. It's being rolled out right now through FAO in a bunch of countries. So maybe once we move it into the post SDG agenda, maybe we can bring land rights more directly into measurement of sustainable development goals. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Claudia. All right, we have one more presenter before we open for questions. I'm going to ask Mohsen to talk about the work of IWMI.
Thank you. We heard a lot about that one, the land rights. So what we are looking at around land and water nexus in a changing climate. Because the water, land, you have it certain, but water is passing it in that one, the downstream area and everything. So first, when we are looking around the water, let's look into the water has, many facets. We are talking about the international river basin because the land, you have it within the countries and everything. But water, as it is a moving object, there are so many things which we need to look around the global scale level, to the regional, to the basin and sub-basin and bilateral agreement. Then we also looking around the national and sub-national, and then also thinking about the smaller one. Let's take the example of the Indus Basin, which we're talking about. Some of the Indus Water Treaty was developed as a part of the transboundary cooperation. But over the period of time, where we're looking at around the globe, 1,600 agreements have happened on the transboundary navigation on the water sources. And out of that one, we are also talking about that one. There is a 400 plus agreement. If we go back to the history about that one, the non-navigational uses is also happening as a part of that one. And when we are looking at it around into the countries, out of 153 countries, 24 countries have the operational arrangement. And then operational, many of the agreement are there, but these are not functional. And then that's creating a lot of problems. So that when we are talking about for land, it's a particularly place, it's located at one place, and you could have the water rights and everything. But when we are talking about the water, that's a big problematic. And even though there is some of the developed countries like Australia, they have developed basically land and water rights separately. Even though you hold that one, the land right, but the water is considered as a common commodity. So that you cannot pump that one, the groundwater, you need to get it again as a common goods, and also looking around the surface water, which is passing into your land, but that's for the downstream user and everything as a part of that one. So it's quite a complex, it's not an easy. So land right, yes, it's quite complex, but water right is also becoming a more complex. And on the top of that one, the climate change is also major issue, which is impacting on the land and water right, and what we can do into those contexts. Quickly looking around that one, the multilateral agreement relevant for water management. I will not go through many of that one, the conventions, but there are many conventions, and that's clearly indicating on that one, water, how we could manage the water, how we could have a better water on that one. And water is also considered as a fundamental human right for drinking water supply, for the one which is again part of the SDG goals and everything. There are many things, and as well as we need to make sure that when we are going for any transboundary agreement, there is no harm. How we could have the water as a shared benefit for the beneficial for all those one. Again, those are the quite complex thing, but let's look into that one the further. We are talking it about that one. It's quite a complex global water cycle. We're talking about that one. The water is coming from ocean, and then that goes passing through the land. What's happening in the river basin at the upstream or in the transboundary level, and then their evaporation. There is also the water which is going into the ground, into the soil, into the land. And then again, some is being used for domestic, some is being used for the agriculture purposes, and all that's quite a complex processes. And then in the whole ecosystem that's coming it, but also at the same time, there is a groundwater storage is also coming due to the human interventions and many things. There is also pollution, which could be from agriculture, which could be from the industry and all that sort of thing. So then when we are talking about the water, we must define it water quantity as well as the quality of that water, not only the quantity, but what that matters and the quality as a part. So we are looking around the nexus. Basically, we have that one, the surface streams. There are smaller ponds at the local community level. And also we are talking about the broader transboundary level that one the sea. But also coming back to the CGIAR vision, what we are working it as in agriculture. So it's important that one, the soil moisture, which is like for the farmers, like a dollars in the bank, the money. That's the soil moisture is fundamental for grazing the crops and as well as for forestry and every purpose of that one. But also when we are talking about land in the upstream, if there is a deforestation is happening, that including increasing the soil erosion, how to balance on that one again, that the land stability and everything is coming important. And on the top is that one looking around the groundwater. But also to have that water, you must have the infrastructure. And then the infrastructure is conveying the water right amount at the right time when you need to grow the crops, when you need to divert the water and everything, and also for various other purposes. And also the lastly thing about the pollution. Pollution could be from industry, pollution could be from agriculture, especially the nitrate and many of the fertilizer and then the pesticide which are being used, and how that's impacting, also contaminating the land, but also contaminating the water, and how we could bring that kind of balance. So in water tenure, what we define it, that the relation customarily or formally legally defined between the people as an individual or groups with regard to the water. That's what we define it. But also the like land, water flows and it's shared. It's a common thing. And then the prioritization is inevitable under the competition, because we know that when there is a lot more competition and during the wet season, there is a lot more water available. During the dry season, there is hardly any amount of water available. How to bring that kind of balance as a part of that one, and how to make sure, especially during the season, the pollution is controlled over all the period of time, and then the water pollution for surface water as well as going to the groundwater, and that's coming it as. So again, in summary, we are talking it about that one. The water is a public trust vested in government. It's not no private water ownership. It's that one, the common goods, and how to make sure that when we are talking, there are many things that are existing between the land and water. And then we need to make sure that when the infrastructure, which is a part of that one, and how to make sure that when the infrastructure is relevant to that one, is passing, water is passing, infrastructure is being developed at the land, but water is again available for the downstream. The example, okay, we are talking about climate change, again, the water availability and all that one, transboundary sharing. Again, the fundamental is no harm. How we could have that one, the water as a shared benefit for that one. And again, it varies from the area to area. There are many of the things which we are developing the infrastructure, which is diverting the water from rural to the urban areas, as well as the irrigation scheme is a classical one. 80 to 90% of water used in Asia and 80% is used in Africa for irrigation. How to make sure that water allocation, as well as the member of water user association based on the land, water and entitlements and all those important. But important is on that one, when we go into the Africa, in terms of water tenure, around 60% of land is customarily governed. How to bring that kind of balance as a part of that one. Last slide is on that one. Again, water, when we are looking around the customary water tenure, water is either a source that you can share as a member of decent based collectivity, or one that you share out to significantly respect. That's what one of the definition when we are talking about the customary water tenure. Another is natural sources belonging to the living, the deceased, and then the yet to be born who make up a community. These are the few of the definition that varies from the different authors. But what we are looking at around that one, there are three ways which we are talking about sharing. Sharing in as a community, as well as we are talking about conflict resolution and everything, then we sharing out with the neighboring communities. Whether we are talking it about that one, in the transboundary at the local level or regional level. An example is the Hill Furrows in Tanzania, the work which IMI has done it. Sharing out is with the powerful formal third parties overridden, basically decolonizing the water law. How we could bring it on that one, that could be from one country to the other country transboundary level. So these are the some of the IMI has some certain publication which are available, and I'm thankful to the Barbara Van Koppen who has done an extensive work, and she was not available today to join it, and she's joining virtually. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mohsen. Oh, Tina, I was wrong. We have one more. Just a few remarks. Yeah, Tina's.
I will not do a presentation. I'm sorry I was not here when I was called, but I am the advocacy head and global policy from ILC. So my boss, Mike Taylor, already presented ILC. Alan, my colleague, already spoke about the local level collaboration we have with CGI centers. And as advocacy, I just wanted to say that for us, it's very important to have CGI centers in our coalition as members, as partners, because that's where we take the information we need to do the advocacy outside, to support members to do the advocacy in the local level, in the national level, and we are very proud of that. So we need that there's a collaboration to become even stronger. We need always your information, your research, because this is what gives us the base to do a good work on the advocacy level in the global, regional, and national level. So thank you so much, Fiona, for organizing all this.
Thank you, Tina. I think that's a great note to end on, the connection between research and advocacy. We've had the world and of the different CGIAR institutes. Do we have any questions in the few minutes remaining to us? Yes. But before the closing remarks, are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you. And thank you to all presenters. My question goes to you. And on the nexus of water and land. And then how does that nexus of water and land brings out the women ownership, specifically on the use of common, but also on the continuous, what we see now happening on water capitalization? How does that really separate the ownership of commons and the capitalization? I saw the last picture on the slide, which you say water decolonization, but how practical is that? Looking even at the space that we are right now, we're looking at private partnership, and how does that brings in community in having this conversation? But also on Colombia, Colombia, right? On the carbon, you said, how did you put it? Something such as sustainable land use, if I'm not mistaken, around there, but it's about carbon marketing. So the way I gather it, so for where I'm coming from, we're having a huge issue on this sustainable forest restoration, if that's how you put it. And how do you demarcate the ownership of the forests and the sustainability to those forests, to those who are residing in those particular areas? I'm from Tanzania, and I saw so much from Tanzania. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you. I mean, you asked a very important question. I will just give an example of that one when we are talking about land and water nexus. Let's take the example of any irrigation area, which is a predominantly, there are land rights which are given by the farmers, and then also the water which is available for the irrigation community. So the way IMI is working we are working with the Water User Association. That's a combination of the community at the local level, which is a giant ownership of the women farmers, the youth, as well as the men. So when we are developing any of the water allocation decision, when we are thinking about how to improve that one, the productivity and everything, and basically working with that, the community, which is the giant ownership of that one, the farmers belong to the women, as well as the men, and as well as the other one. Recently, I was in Tanzania under the CGIAR Fresh Initiative, where we are working it with the small scale farmers in the Anusha area, and working with that one, there was around 40 people as a group. Out of that one, the 18 were the female, and around 5 were the youth. And then they have everyone has a small parcel of land, less than 1 acre. And looking into that one, how we could have that one, they are commonly working on one of the parcel of the demonstration field, but then bringing up the best practice from there, how to best utilize the water for the other parcel. That's how we have been working it. It's fundamental that we need to be inclusive, and we need to make sure that the voices which we are not oftenly hearing it, whether in Asia or in Africa, how to bring those voices as a part of that one. I will not take much of a week considering the time, but happy to have an offline conversation with you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I imagine that the forest, our forest governance models are quite different in Colombia compared to Tanzania. On one hand, there's the forest that's just on properties, on farmer properties. And with these interventions focused on agroforestry, the livestock is the greatest driver, or the biggest driver of deforestation in Colombia. And so by working with the silvopastoral systems, the aim is to reduce because they also are kind of a form of an intensification, to increase output by increasing the animal welfare and health, and that helps to reduce pressure on deforestation. And then with the cacao agroforestry, it's more focused on just maintaining the forest cover. But Colombia also has several other kinds of forest models. I'm blanking on the names of the different types of kind of like territorial governance that they have over forests. There's of course like protected areas, which also see a lot of deforestation, unfortunately. Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, communal reserves. Yeah, where they do have a kind of communal governance structure where, I mean, it's by the government. I mean, maybe you can answer this question even better than me. No, okay. Where the government has demarcated forest areas that it is permitted to have some use of the forest, some extraction of the forest from these kind of like a communal setting. They're finding that the protected areas are not effective in reducing deforestation, which is unfortunate. But what has been effective are these kinds of like indigenous territorial management of forests, and these communal social, I'm blanking on and I think there's different kinds of them as well, but yeah.
Thank you. We are at time, so I think now is a good time to hear some closing remarks from Kargele.
Just to make sure that I don't step into. Very nice of you. And for those who are very curious, they have heard about my alarm clock. It always rings around 6:30, which means it's my dinner time. So by then I stop working and just enjoy my dinner. So I make sure that I don't take too much of your time. Normally when I listen to people, I like really to summarize what I have learned. But today I learned a lot so that I can't attempt to summarize. But there are a few things that I believe are really our take-home messages. We have built a relationship between ILC, all the CGIAR centers, but also our close partners. But sometimes we establish relationships which die slowly because of several reasons. And in majority of the cases, it's because we don't have anything to do together. We have decided to establish a relationship, but we don't do anything together. Over time, it dies. So congratulations to all the teams who have been involved in the joint work that you have been doing together. Make sure that you keep on track. It's really one of the, someone was talking about the indicators, the tools, and what. One of the indicators that we can use for the sustainability of our relationship is the number of opportunities of doing something together. So let us keep on track. I do believe from Riyadh, we will continue the interactions, but we will get another gathering, I do believe, in the middle of next year. And I hope by then we will have additional examples to provide. Second lesson I got from here is whatever we do, we have to understand for whom we do it, and if it's really a priority of the person or the communities or the individuals, we are doing it. Otherwise, we will be wasting someone's time. And at the end, our time as well. So really, I was very happy to hear that everything you do or you have been doing together, you first listen to the communities and then you achieve some results. I'm a global citizen when I talk about myself because of how my life has been very funny and confusing. But my roots are somewhere in Africa. And where we know in majority of the cases, it's almost like taboo when you talk about the social inclusion. It's coming slowly, but in majority of the communities, people will ask, you are coming to create confusion. I came back to Africa from where I was lost, and I was doing a bit of regulations. And I got an text. Congratulations to the books, to the different tools, Fiona, you got. Then I went as a regulatory officer, I said, we need to have inspection systems in place. Someone looked at me and said, my friend, the place where you were lost has spoiled you. So we don't talk about inspections, but we can develop the tools. But what I want to say, really, I like the point that you've made, that you are putting in place tools and metrics that allows us to be able to say that we are making the right progress. In those tools, let us not only implement them for the projects we are implementing, but also implement for the healthy of our relationship. And with this, for those who are going for dinner, I want you to enjoy your dinner. And thank you very much for productive discussions.